Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I love pincushions. I love collecting them, but I also love using them, and I have them all over the house. I have one, and it's right beside my chair in my sewing room. It has all the different types of thread that I use the most, and a nice big pincushion. I also have one in my living room. It's an old candy jar, and it has this tiny little pincushion in it. And when I close it up, no one knows it's there. I also have one in my bedroom. And it's this little strawberry, and I keep some pins in it and some safety pins. This is just so that if I need a pin or two, I have it handy without having to leave my room. And I have more than one around my sewing room. I have a stack in the corner of magnetic ones because you just never know when I'm going to need an extra one. And I do have one that sits beside my sewing machine with a little pocket in it. And I have my point turner in it and some other little tools. And I have one that's magnetic that sits on my industrial iron. I have a pincushion that my daughter made me that is hanging on my design wall with big pins in it so that I can pin up my squares and my quilts as I'm getting done with them. I also have a pincushion that was a wonderful gift given to me that is sitting on my desk. Don't use it as a pincushion. It's just there as a decoration because I enjoy it. I have a miniature Tuffet pincushion. These have glow-in-the-dark pins, which are kind of fun. It just sits on my shelf. I have a pincushion that has all of my pins that are lettered. I have little pin books that I throw in my purse, so as I'm traveling, I have them handy. And if I'm needing thread to travel with, I have an antique bonnet that my grandmother made. And when you open it up, you're able to keep your pins and thread in the center. And it has this area in that bonnet where I can put my pins, and with a little snap, it's closed, and it looks like a nice old-fashioned bonnet. I made this pincushion over 10 years ago, and I made it because I found this little head and arms from the rabbit. Matter of fact, I found two. So I made two, thinking it'd be nice to have two in the room. This one I don't use as much as I use this one, and there's a couple of reasons that I've discovered why. There are some differences between the two, but they're not differences that you can necessarily see. Half the body is filled with a decorative sand, so it's very, very heavy, and I often use it to hold my patterns down as I'm going. If I have a slippery fabric, I'm able to put this on, and it holds it a little bit better. There are times I'll put a piece of ribbon underneath her and hold it if I need to tie that ribbon, or even pin the ribbon to her as I'm trying to tie it. Because it's nice and heavy, it holds it securely. The little partner to her is very lightweight. It just has fiberfill in it, so it's not as heavy, and I find I don't use it as much because I do like the heaviness of this one. Probably my favorite feature is the head. The reason is it's easy to grab. The head becomes a handle, and I'm able just to pick this up and bring it wherever I want. The other thing I like is the additional ears, because I put all sorts of things in the ears, and that way they're not lost inside of the pincushion. Another feature that is not on this pincushion, which is on this pincushion, is a glued button. And this is something I do with all the new pincushions that I make. I glue a button or some kind of a marking. And in this case, it's a little button right on the side. That little button is an area where I can put things that I don't want to lose them, like my hand sewing needles. If you put a hand sewing needle in the center of your pincushion, because there's no ball on it, it does get lost. So here, I know exactly where to put them, so I'll know where to get them next time I need them. And I like the size. It is a big pincushion, so I can put a lot of pins in it. And I also can put stacks of buttons that I'm going to be working on a project. I have found that I don't use the little hands at all. It's just the head that I find I use the most. I'm going to try to duplicate this with something that is available now. And right now you can get these little kits. They're called Top This, and they're designed to make hats. And at the top of the hat sits this little animal instead of a pom-pom. You can get all sorts of animals, even a rabbit. The nice thing about this that this did not have is there's a string attached to his head, and pull that top right off. So I still have the wool that I can make the hat. I'll just have to use a pom-pom. This has beautiful velvet on it, but I did find a very thin, fun fur. I know it's a cow print, but I think with the panda, it still will look nice. This thin faux fur fabric you can buy in places like Walmart, and they sell them in these little bolts. The circle for the body is about 14 inches. So you can take a nice big square, find the center, and just mark all the way around. You can also fold the fabric in half and then in half one more time. And where you have that fold meeting, you can also put the ruler and do the 8-inch mark in this way. So you are only marking a quarter of it. It doesn't have to be really exact, and you can make it any size circle you want. Just join up those marks, making sure that fabric is flat underneath. I can cut out the circle. Now when I open this up, I'm going to have that nice big circle that I want. I need to make a mark in the center of this circle. Fold the right sides together and put a pin right in the corner. Now when you open it up, you will know where your center mark is. The next we'll be doing a running stitch around the outside so we can pull this into that circular shape. I would recommend doing a running stitch at least a 1/4 inch in from that seam allowance. If you go too close to the seam allowance, as you pull to gather it in, those threads can rip out of the seam allowance. For the thread, you're going to need a thread that is very strong so that if you pull on it, it's not going to break. And then in the end, I'm going to do a nice big knot. The stitch is going to be a gathering stitch or a running stitch. Nothing fancy in and out. I'm going to continue to go in and out all the way around. At least a 1/4 inch, even a 1/2 inch is going to be fine. And do that running stitch all the way around. Once that running stitch has been done, I want to put a little bit of a fiber fill right in the middle. Eventually, this is going to have a little hole in it, so that fiber fill is just going to sort of put a plug in it, because after that, I'm going to use some kind of a decorative sand or a decorative plastic for the weight. And I don't want the sand or the plastic to go through that hole. So I'm going to put a piece of fiber fill right there and draw up that circle just a little bit so that you can dump in some of those pellets or the sand. And I'm going to put a whole pile right into the bottom. I'm going to pour them to start with right on top of that fiber so the fiber does not move. The amount is really not that important. You're not filling the whole thing with the stones. You just want the weight on the bottom. And in this case, there's probably about a cup, maybe a cup and a half. And I'm going to just have all those stones go to the bottom. Now I can take that fiber fill and stick it inside. And as I hold that thread, I'm going to be able to keep filling that fiber in there till I get the size that I want. Pull it as tight as you can so that you have a very little opening up at the top, and tie a knot. Would be good if you stitched all the way around, and that's going to hold all those pleats together. You can see all those little stitching lines around, and that's just going to secure that. We're going to need a little bit of an opening because we are going to need to put that ribbon in through to the bottom. But before we do this, I'd like to cover up this hole so that he has a nice collar and we won't see any of the stitching. In my little bunny, I just added a lace collar, but for the panda, I'm just going to use some of the original fabric, and I've just cut it with a pair of pinking shears so it doesn't fray. Put that string through the center of this little collar. This hole is going to be as small as I need. We need to get this ribbon right through the center, coming out through this pin area. Get the longest needle that you can. It has to be good and strong and have a good eye opening, because this is going to need to go through the eye and through the pincushion. I was able to get that ribbon through the hole. Poke that through and make those fibers come apart. Now I can work this big needle through the bag and into the bottom. If your needle's not long enough, you might need to squish this. So I'm going to go through the center and out through that little hole that I just made. And pull that ribbon out. A button with 2 holes is going to work great to tie the bottom up. Those holes need to be big enough to put that ribbon through. With the ribbon coming out of each of the holes, you're going to be able to push this button down, tie a knot. Once that ribbon is good and secure, I would put a little drop of glue in there just to secure it so the knot doesn't come undone. Trim off that ribbon. The size of the circle is going to determine how wide he is, not how high. Because that squish factor is really going to be the same, it's only going to get bigger and bigger. We now have a nice, heavy, big pincushion. There are 2 things I like to do when I get a new pincushion. Put that button marking on it so I know where my sewing pins are going to be. And in this case, I'm going to use a ring. And I'm going to glue that somewhere on the pincushion. The next thing I do is I like to start with new pins. Over time, your pins do become dull, just like your sewing machine needle and your hand needle. They have these great little rose gold pins. Rose head pins are what I'm going to put in my new pincushion. If you like to keep a spare set of scissors handy near your pincushion, you can get a pair that fold. They sort of look like a pair of eyeglasses. And when you open them up, they turn into a pair of scissors. Fold them back and they're safe. Attach those to your pincushion. The size of ribbon is going to be a personal choice to what you want. I can take that and loop it around his head. Now that pair of scissors is always going to be handy. So I now have a new member to my pincushion family. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.